There's something wrong with the Sphinx. Stand in front of it on a quiet morning before the tour buses arrive, and you can feel it. This creature, half lion, half human, wholly enigmatic, has guarded the Giza plateau for what we've been told is about 4,500 years. But here's the thing. The stone itself is trying to tell us a different story. The limestone body shows weathering patterns that shouldn't exist in a desert. Seismic equipment has detected hollow spaces beneath the paws that no one can fully explain. The face, what remains of it, may not be the original face at all. And the head, when you really look at it, seems oddly small for that massive leonine body. I've walked around the Sphinx enclosure a dozen times, in different seasons, different lights. Each time, I leave with more questions than I brought. Egyptian authorities maintain strict narratives about this monument, but the physical evidence keeps whispering contradictions. What you're about to discover are 4 mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about Egypt's most famous guardian. And I'll be honest, none of them have comfortable answers.
The Sphinx rests in a pit carved from the Giza bedrock, its body emerging from living limestone like something half-born from the earth itself. When you descend into the enclosure, the walls tower above you, 30 feet of stratified stone, layer upon layer of geological history. The morning sun hits those walls at an angle, and if you know what to look for, you'll see something that doesn't fit the standard timeline. The stone is scarred, not by wind or sand as you'd expect in a desert climate, but by something else entirely. Vertical channels run down the limestone surfaces, deep, undulating grooves that look like nothing else on the Giza plateau. They look, for all the world, like water damage. In 1990, a geologist named Robert Schoch walked into this enclosure and stopped in his tracks. Schoch wasn't an Egyptologist looking to rewrite history. He was a Boston University professor who'd been brought to Egypt specifically to disprove alternative dating theories. He was supposed to confirm the conventional timeline and put the whole debate to rest. Instead, what he saw in those walls changed his career and ignited a controversy that still burns today. 10,000 years ago, this plateau looked nothing like the arid landscape we see now. Egypt's climate was fundamentally different. The Sahara wasn't yet a desert, it was savanna, grassland dotted with lakes and crossed by seasonal rivers. Rainfall was abundant, intense monsoon-level precipitation that carved landscapes and filled waterways. The people who lived here then weren't building pyramids, they were hunter-gatherers, or at most, early agricultural communities. According to conventional archaeology, they possessed neither the organization nor the technology to carve a 73-foot-long monument from bedrock. But the weathering patterns Schoch documented tell a story that's hard to dismiss. He identified 2 distinct types of erosion on the Sphinx and its enclosure. The body of the Sphinx itself shows deep vertical weathering, rounded, rolling, precipitated erosion characteristic of rainfall runoff. The walls of the enclosure display the same patterns. These are, Schoch argued, textbook examples of water weathering, the kind you see in regions with sustained rainfall over long periods. Here's the problem. Egypt hasn't experienced that kind of climate for at least 7,000 years. The conventional dating of the Sphinx to around 2500 BCE, the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, puts it squarely in the historical period when Egypt was already becoming the desert kingdom we recognize. Schoch brought in a seismologist named Thomas DeBecke to help investigate. In 1991, they conducted seismic refraction analysis using seismic refraction equipment. The principle is straightforward. You send sound waves into the ground and measure how they bounce back. Different densities of rock return different readings. Weathered limestone returns different signals than fresh limestone. What they found was revealing. The floor of the Sphinx enclosure showed the deepest weathering at the front and sides of the monument, exactly where water pooling and runoff would cause the most damage. The back portion, carved later and exposed to fewer millennia of rainfall, showed less weathering. The readings suggested the Sphinx body could have been exposed to the elements for far longer than 4,500 years. Conventional Egyptologists pushed back immediately and hard. They argued that the weathering could be explained by wind, sand erosion, humidity, and salt crystallization, processes that occur in desert environments. They pointed out that accepting an older date for the Sphinx would require rewriting everything we understand about the development of Egyptian civilization. Where were the precursor monuments? Where was the gradual development of carving techniques? How could prehistoric people accomplish what should have required the organizational complexity of a later dynastic state? Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities, has been particularly vocal in rejecting the water erosion theory. He and other mainstream archaeologists argue that the evidence is being misinterpreted, that geological analysis alone cannot override the archaeological and historical context. They maintain that the Sphinx was carved during Khafre's reign, part of the same construction program that built the Second Pyramid. The causeway from Khafre's pyramid leads directly to the Sphinx Temple, they note. The architectural style of the Sphinx Temple matches other 4th Dynasty structures. Yet, Schoch stands by his geological assessment. He's not alone. Other geologists who've examined the site have reached similar conclusions, though not all agree on the implications. The debate has become deeply polarized, with expertise in different fields leading to fundamentally different interpretations of the same evidence. What strikes me most about this controversy is what it reveals about the limits of our knowledge. We trust scientific disciplines to provide clear answers, but here we have geology suggesting one timeline and archaeology insisting on another. Both are legitimate fields of study, both are using valid methodologies, and both cannot be completely right. The Sphinx keeps its secrets, weathered by forces we're still arguing about. Those vertical scars in the limestone aren't going anywhere. Neither, it seems, is the debate about what made them.
If you could see beneath the surface of the Giza Plateau, you'd discover that what appears solid is actually honeycombed with voids. Natural limestone formations create cavities, ancient quarrying left chambers and passages, and scattered throughout are deliberate constructions, tombs, temples, storage chambers, some documented, others suspected, and a few that exist in that uncertain space between confirmed and speculated. Directly beneath and around the Sphinx, seismic surveys have detected anomalies that nobody can fully explain. These aren't wild claims from fringe researchers. These are readings from legitimate geophysical equipment, conducted by teams from multiple institutions, all finding roughly the same thing. There are hollow spaces down there. The story begins in 1987 when a Japanese team from Waseda University brought ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic sounding equipment to Giza. They were part of a broader survey project, mapping what lay beneath various structures on the plateau. When they scanned the area around the Sphinx, their equipment registered several subsurface anomalies. The data suggested a cavity beneath the northern paw. Another reading indicated a possible tunnel extending from the south side of the Sphinx toward the Khafre Pyramid. A third anomaly appeared northwest of the monument. The Japanese researchers published their findings in technical journals, carefully worded, making no grand claims, simply reporting that the equipment had detected density variations consistent with voids. 4 years later, when Thomas DeBecke conducted his seismic work to assist Robert Schoch's erosion analysis, he detected similar irregularities. His equipment identified what appeared to be a rectangular chamber beneath the paws, possibly extending 10 feet by 15 feet. The readings weren't conclusive enough to map precise dimensions, but they clearly indicated something other than solid limestone. Here's where it gets complicated. Some of these voids are known and documented. There's a small chamber cut into the back of the Sphinx. You can see the entrance if you walk around to the rear. There are passages within the enclosure walls. Ancient and medieval visitors reported cavities and tunnels, some of which have been found and others which remain undiscovered. But the anomalies detected by modern equipment seem to indicate chambers or passages that haven't been fully explored or officially acknowledged. Walk around the Giza Plateau today and you'll notice something. Access is tightly controlled. certain areas are off-limits to tourists, researchers, and even most archaeologists. The Supreme Council of Antiquities determines who can dig, scan, or probe. Permissions are rarely granted for invasive investigation. This isn't necessarily sinister. Egypt's antiquities have been plundered, damaged, and exploited for centuries. Caution is understandable, but it does mean that intriguing anomalies can remain uninvestigated for decades.
In the early 1990s, a documentary team obtained permission to conduct limited exploration. They used a fiber optic camera lowered into a small shaft that runs vertically down from the rear of the Sphinx's back. The shaft goes down about 20 feet before becoming blocked. What's down there? Officially, it's considered a natural fissure or perhaps an unfinished shaft from ancient times, but no comprehensive exploration has been publicly reported. Ancient texts add tantalizing context. Roman writers mentioned passages beneath the Sphinx. Medieval Arab historians recorded legends of tunnels leading to hidden chambers containing knowledge from before the flood. The 10th century writer Al-Makrizi described attempts by treasure hunters to break into the Sphinx, searching for rumored chambers within. Are these just legends or dim cultural memories of real features that once existed? The possibility that deliberately constructed chambers exist beneath the monument isn't outlandish. Egyptian temples regularly included crypts, storage chambers, and ritual spaces below ground. The nearby Sphinx Temple and Valley Temple both have basement-level features. Would it be so strange if the Sphinx itself incorporated subterranean elements? Some researchers have suggested that if the Sphinx is indeed older than currently accepted, it might have been built atop or around earlier structures. The chambers detected by seismic equipment could predate the Sphinx itself, incorporated into the monument during its construction. Others propose that chambers were added later, carved into the bedrock beneath the monument for purposes we can only guess at: storage, ritual use, burial. The Egyptian authorities maintain that extensive exploration has been conducted and nothing of significance has been found beyond what's already documented. They argue that the seismic anomalies can be explained by natural geological features, old exploration tunnels, or quirks in the limestone density. They insist that claims of secret chambers are overblown, fueled by documentary sensationalism rather than archaeological reality. But here's what we know for certain. The equipment detected anomalies. Multiple teams, multiple technologies, roughly consistent results. Whether those anomalies are natural voids, ancient quarry spaces, or deliberately constructed chambers remains unconfirmed because comprehensive investigation hasn't been permitted, or at least hasn't been publicly reported. My own feeling is that there's probably less down there than enthusiasts hope and more than skeptics admit. The limestone beneath Giza is complex. Not every void needs to be a secret chamber full of lost knowledge. But the patterns detected by seismic equipment deserve thorough investigation. Science works best when we follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when that means digging where authorities would prefer we didn't. Until someone actually excavates beneath those paws, until ground-penetrating radar is paired with physical exploration, we're left with echo readings and unconfirmed possibilities, hollow spaces beneath a monument that already holds too many secrets. The Sphinx is missing its nose. Everyone knows this. Stand in front of the monument and the damage is immediately obvious. A gouged cavity where the nose should be. One of the most recognizable examples of vandalism in archaeological history. But here's the mystery. Nobody knows for certain who did it, when it happened, or why. I've heard the Napoleon story 100 times. Tour guides still tell it. Napoleon's troops used the Sphinx for target practice in 1798, artillery fire blowing off the nose in an act of casual colonial destruction. It's a perfect villain narrative, European military arrogance destroying African heritage. There's just one problem. It's not true. We know it's not true because of a sketch made by a Danish artist named Frederick Louis Norden in 1737, more than 60 years before Napoleon arrived in Egypt. Norden's drawing clearly shows the Sphinx without a nose. The damage had already occurred. Napoleon's troops may have done many questionable things during the Egyptian campaign, but destroying the Sphinx's nose wasn't one of them. So when did it happen? The trail gets murky. An Arab historian named al-Makrizi, writing around 1400 CE, tells a story about a Sufi Muslim named Muhammad Sayyim al-Dar, who was executed in 1378 for vandalism against the Sphinx. According to al-Makrizi's account, Sayyim al-Dar was disturbed that local peasants were making offerings to the Sphinx, treating it as an object of veneration, perhaps even worship. Viewing this as idolatry, he took tools and deliberately damaged the face, particularly destroying the nose. The local population, enraged that he'd harmed a monument they revered and blamed for protecting their harvests, pressured authorities to execute him. If this account is accurate, we have our answer. The nose was destroyed in 1378 CE as an act of religious iconoclasm. But there's debate about whether al-Makrizi's account is reliable. Some historians point out that he was writing decades after the alleged event, potentially recording hearsay or legend rather than documented fact. Physical examination of the damage adds another layer to the mystery. The nose wasn't just broken off, it shows evidence of being deliberately pried away. You can see chisel marks in the nasal cavity, systematic damage that suggests someone worked to remove it rather than simply smashing it. This supports the intentional vandalism theory. But when you look at the beard, the ceremonial false beard that once extended from the Sphinx's chin, you see different damage patterns. The beard appears to have fallen off due to structural failure, not deliberate destruction. Fragments of it were found in the sand and are now in the British Museum and Egyptian Museum.
The Ottoman period saw considerable stone robbing at Giza. Limestone blocks from temples and monuments were taken for building projects in Cairo. It's possible that during this era, someone targeted the Sphinx's nose, perhaps for raw material or perhaps for ideological reasons. Ottoman records don't specifically mention the Sphinx, but they do document systematic quarrying of ancient monuments. There's another possibility that researchers sometimes whisper about but rarely publish. The nose may have been damaged in pharaonic times itself, then repaired or replaced, and those repairs failed in the medieval period. Ancient Egyptian statues were sometimes vandalized during periods of political upheaval, new dynasties defacing monuments of old ones, religious reformations targeting representations of rejected gods. Could the Sphinx have been damaged and repaired multiple times across its long history? The stone doesn't preserve enough detail to confirm this, but it can't be ruled out entirely. What's harder to explain is why the rest of the face has weathered so differently from the nose area. The lips, the eyes, the cheeks, they all show erosion consistent with millennia of exposure to wind and sand. But the nasal cavity shows sharper edges, less weathering, as if the damage is more recent. This observation supports a medieval date for the destruction rather than ancient vandalism. Climate and environmental conditions may have contributed regardless of the immediate cause. The Sphinx is carved from 3 different qualities of limestone: softer, more porous layers, and harder, more resistant ones. The nose was carved from a particularly vulnerable section. Natural erosion combined with structural stress could have weakened it, making it more susceptible to relatively minor force. Stand at the Sphinx today and look at where the nose used to be. The cavity is surprisingly large. The nose was monumental, projecting several feet from the face. Its weight would have created stress on the relatively thin connection point. Over thousands of years, that stress, combined with temperature fluctuations, moisture absorption, and wind erosion, could have created microfractures. Perhaps Sayyim al-Dar or another vandal only needed to apply modest force to a structure already on the verge of collapse. What strikes me most about this mystery isn't just the uncertainty about when or who, but why it matters so much to us.
We want villains, we want clear narratives. The idea that such iconic damage might have been slow, natural, and anticlimactic, or caused by someone we've never heard of for reasons that made sense to them, doesn't satisfy our need for story. The Sphinx's face, even damaged, still manages to gaze east toward the rising sun, as it has for millennia. The missing nose should diminish its presence. Somehow, it doesn't. The mystery of what happened to that carved stone has become part of the monument's identity, another layer of enigma wrapped around a creature already defined by questions. We may never know for certain. The historical record is incomplete, physical evidence is ambiguous, and the stone itself has forgotten. Look at the Sphinx from the side, from a distance where you can see the whole monument in profile. Notice anything odd? The head seems small. Not slightly small, dramatically, obviously, uncomfortably small for the massive leonine body stretching out behind it. The proportions just don't work. I remember the first time an archaeologist pointed this out to me. We were standing near the Solar Boat Museum, looking across at the Sphinx in late afternoon light. "See the head-to-body ratio?" he asked. "It's wrong. Lions don't look like that. Egyptian lion statues don't look like that. That head is proportioned for a much smaller body, or that body is proportioned for a much larger head." Once he said it, I couldn't unsee it. The Sphinx's head is roughly 30 feet from chin to crown. The body stretches about 240 feet long and 66 feet high at the rear haunches. When sculptors carve a lion, ancient or modern, they follow certain proportional rules that reflect actual lion anatomy. The head is typically about 1/7 to 1/8 of the total body length, but the Sphinx's head is closer to 1/12 of the body length. The disproportion is significant, unmistakable once you're looking for it. This observation has led some researchers to a startling theory. The head we see today is not the original head. The Sphinx, they argue, was initially carved as a full lion, head and body in proper proportion. At some later date, the original lion's head was recarved into the human head we see now, reducing its size in the process. The theory was prominently proposed by researcher Robert Temple in the 1990s and has been examined by various researchers since. The reasoning goes like this. If the Sphinx is older than the 4th dynasty, as the water erosion evidence suggests, it would have been carved before the Egyptian tradition of human-headed royal statues became standard. Early monuments were animals, lions, bulls, hawks. A lion guardian would fit the archaic style. Later, when Pharaoh Khafre, or another ruler, wanted to claim the monuments, the head was recarved in his image, creating the human-headed Sphinx we recognize now. Look closely at the head, and you'll notice it's carved from a different quality of limestone than the body, harder, more resistant to erosion. But this doesn't necessarily support the recarving theory. It simply reflects the natural stratification of the bedrock. The Sphinx was carved in place from layers of limestone of varying hardness. The head happens to be from a more durable layer. However, proponents of the recarving theory point to other evidence. The head shows significantly less weathering than the body, much less. While the body displays those deep erosion patterns we discussed earlier, the head is relatively pristine, apart from the missing nose and surface wear. If both were carved at the same time and exposed to the same conditions, shouldn't they show similar weathering?
The counter-argument is that the head is carved from harder stone, as mentioned, and also that it's smaller and higher up, exposing less surface area to ground-level weathering processes. These factors could explain the preservation difference without requiring recarving. There's also the question of the Nima's headdress, the striped pharaonic headcloth the Sphinx wears. You can still see faint traces of it in the stone, particularly around the sides of the head. This headdress is characteristic of New Kingdom and later iconography, not the Old Kingdom when the Sphinx was supposedly carved. Does this suggest later modification, or does it simply mean the headdress was added to an already existing human head during a restoration project centuries after the initial carving? Measurements of the head reveal another puzzling detail. When researchers mapped the facial features and compared them to known statues of Khafre, they found the proportions don't match. The Sphinx's face is broader, the features different. If Khafre commissioned the Sphinx as a self-portrait, the conventional theory, why doesn't it look like him? Some Egyptologists argue that ancient sculptors weren't aiming for portrait accuracy the way we understand it. Royal statues were idealized representations, not realistic portraits. The goal was to capture divine kingship, not individual features. By this reasoning, we shouldn't expect the Sphinx to match Khafre's other statues. But others point out that Egyptian royal sculptures from the 4th dynasty show remarkable consistency. We can recognize statues of specific pharaohs across different monuments. They weren't making generic king faces. They were carving recognizable individuals. The fact that the Sphinx doesn't match Khafre's other portraits is, at minimum, curious. In recent decades, forensic experts have used computer modeling to analyze the Sphinx's facial structure. Some have concluded that the features, allowing for artistic convention, could plausibly represent Khafre. Others have argued that the face shows characteristics inconsistent with Khafre's known statuary. The debate remains unsettled. The recarving theory faces significant challenges. Most importantly, if the head was recarved to a smaller size, where did all the stone go? Recarving a massive lion's head into a smaller human head would generate tremendous quantities of stone chips and debris. None have been found in the stratified deposits around the Sphinx, which have been studied extensively. The archaeological layers don't show evidence of a major recarving event. Additionally, the carving style of the head, while not definitely matching Khafre, is consistent with Old Kingdom sculptural conventions. It doesn't appear to be work from a significantly later period. If the head was recarved, it must have happened relatively soon after the initial carving, during the same broad historical era, using similar techniques. My own feeling is that the proportions are genuinely strange, and that strangeness deserves acknowledgement. Whether it's because the head was recarved or because the original sculptors were working within constraints we don't understand, or because our aesthetic expectations don't align with ancient Egyptian ones, I can't say with confidence. What I do know is that standing there, looking at that small head on that enormous body, something feels off, and I'm not alone in that feeling. The Sphinx keeps its own counsel, wearing a face that may or may not have always been its face, proportioned in ways that make sense to eyes long closed.
I've circled the Sphinx enclosure many times, in different years, different seasons, different states of mind. Each visit leaves me with the same uncomfortable awareness. We don't know this monument as well as we pretend to. The water-worn walls whisper about ages before pharaohs. The hollow echoes beneath the paws suggest the monument sits atop secrets still buried. The missing nose reminds us how easily history gets rewritten, how confidently we tell stories we can't actually confirm. And that too small head raises questions about whether what we're looking at is what was originally carved or something that's been changed, claimed, transformed across millennia. These mysteries share a common thread. They all challenge the comfortable narrative that we've figured out ancient Egypt, that the timeline is settled, that the monuments have yielded their secrets. They remind us that stone remembers differently than we do. Geology records truths that don't fit archaeological timelines. Physics reveals voids where there should be solid ground. Proportion and artistry whisper that something doesn't quite match. The Sphinx has been guardian, God, symbol, and mystery for longer than most civilizations have existed. It has watched empires rise and collapse. It has been buried to its neck in sand and excavated into sunlight. It has been worshipped, defaced, studied, scanned, measured, theorized about, and still, it keeps its deepest secrets. Maybe that's exactly as it should be. Maybe some monuments are meant to be perpetual questions rather than definitive answers. Maybe the value isn't in solving the mystery, but in allowing it to remind us how much we still don't know, how much wonder remains in stone and sand and time. The Sphinx endures, and so do the questions. Standing before it, I'm always aware that I'm in the presence of something that new things I'll never learn, carved by hands motivated by purposes I can only guess at, watching the horizon with stone eyes that have seen more history than I can imagine. What the Sphinx knows, it isn't telling, at least not yet, and perhaps not ever. Some secrets, once you've kept them for 5,000 years, or 7 or 10, become too heavy to put down. They become part of what you are. The mystery becomes the monument, and the monument becomes eternal.